Apple Blitz with Anthony Rivardo and Matt O'Leary.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Big Apple Blitz. What's going on? Matt O'Leary, joined as always by Anthony Rivardo. Anthony, how's it going, my friend?
It's going great, man. I'm excited for tonight. We're getting some New York Giants behind-the-scenes look in the Hard Knocks episode or series. I don't know if it's like a weekly series or if it's just all dropping at once. Maybe it's only one special. I'm not really sure, but I guess I'll be surprised tonight whenever I log into my HBO account and watch it. But we should get some really interesting takeaways from the offseason, behind-the-scenes look at Joe Schoen, maybe negotiating with Saquon Barkley, maybe Xavier McKinney as well, and anything else that they decided to record and present to us.
I love that. I will be tuning in as well at some point tonight for Hard Knocks. Also, it's Anthony's birthday, so happy birthday, Anthony. You get a little Giants present for you today, too.
Yeah, thank you. And it is pretty exciting. The Giants giving me something on my birthday. You know, that's pretty cool stuff. So I get to sit down after I have my dinner and maybe a slice or two of birthday cake and then watch my New York Giants on Hard Knocks behind the scenes. It should be pretty cool.
Love it. Things you absolutely love to see. And let's start right there for the episode today, which is the New York Giants on Hard Knocks. Kind of just, I guess, what are you expecting to see from this? This is kind of the first time we're getting like a off-season version of Hard Knocks. So any expectations or guesses of what we might see tonight?
Well, last week, I think it was, they released a little bit of a trailer preview clip of the Hard Knocks special, and they showed Joe Schoen doing a little bit of conversation with Saquon Barkley. So hopefully we get to see a little bit more of that. I'm really excited to see how that went down, what resulted or what led to the result of Barkley signing with the Philadelphia Eagles. We've heard a lot of conflicting reports. Some reporters have said that the Giants never made him an offer. Saquon Barkley has said that himself, but other reporters have said that the Giants did make him offers just earlier in the offseason, so it wasn't like right at free agency that they made him that offer. So now we'll get a little bit more of a behind-the-scenes look, see what went into the Giants' thought process and letting Saquon Barkley walk. And, of course, we're also going to see some of the conversation with them negotiating with the Panthers to trade for Brian Burns. So all of those big offseason acquisitions, whether they're acquisitions that the Giants made or other teams made to take away Giants players, I'm just excited to see how all of that went down.
Yeah, hopefully it's going to almost feel like a fly on the wall for some of the offseason stuff. Like I know the Jets on YouTube, they put out their kind of like their own version with One Jets Drive. So kind of similar when they do their offseason episodes, they give you a little bit in the draft room or, you know, the scouting, looking at these players. And a little bit like obviously it's very edited so that you're not getting like way too much information, which I totally understand. But at the same time, I think it's a cool insight for fans who don't usually get to see that kind of thing, the behind the scenes of how it works. And for football nerds like us, I think we thrive off that.
Absolutely. I love that stuff. I mean, one of the things that intrigues me the most in the NFL is front office work. Like anytime I get some sort of look behind the scenes at what a team is doing on draft night or doing in free agency period, that's the stuff that really, really excites me. Like I love the training camp practice videos as well, but anytime I get a behind the scenes look at how a front office operates, that's my favorite. I think that stuff is so cool because at the end of the day, the NFL is a business, and to see these GMs and front office personnel or front office executives rather kind of operate like it's a business and structure this team so that they can get their wins and keep their jobs. That stuff is always just so interesting to me, just to see the way that football works behind the scenes and off of the football field.
Now, do you think we'll get any like slow motion Tommy DeVito throws from OTAs in Hard Knocks?
Man, I hope so.
That's what I'm hoping for. A little Tommy DeVito to Malik Neighbors, maybe. Year 6 leap Daniel Jones throwing some slow motion passes to Wan'Dale Robinson. You know, all the good stuff that we need to see.
We'll probably get some of that. And in the preview trailer that they did for Hard Knocks, they showed Daniel Jones getting in some work and talking about his ACL rehab. So we should get a nice behind the scenes look at that and maybe get an update on where his recovery is. Maybe they'll reveal when exactly he plans to return to the practice field in a full capacity. Maybe we'll get some more information on that tonight. So that could be pretty big for the Giants as they look ahead to training camp at the end of this month, really only 3 weeks away. So we might get some really interesting info on Daniel Jones as he prepares to make that coveted year 6 leap.
Yeah, but all kidding aside, I think seeing the recovery too from Daniel Jones and just kind of, I'm sure they'll take you through from like where he began with the injury into the rehabbing process and coming back. Like even that too, I think would be an interesting watch. But last year the Jets were on Hard Knocks. It was a fun season. It was a lot of intrigue with Aaron Rodgers coming in. And it was a good behind the scenes look, at least I thought for my team. So you kind of get the same thing now with the New York Giants, and just hopefully it doesn't become a distraction. Not that I think it will for the Giants, but if things go poorly, people will point to, oh, well, they had Hard Knocks. So they weren't always focused on the field, which is a little ridiculous, but you're always going to get those takes like that.
Yeah, always going to get something like that. But at the end of the day, I think that this is just kind of a fun little behind the scenes look to celebrate year 100 for the Giants. I think that's the only reason that they agreed to do this is because they're going into their 100th season. So I'm sure they figured, why not give something to the fans, give them a little bit of insight, a little bit of a closer look at how we operate and how we're preparing for this upcoming 100th season. Because obviously last season, massive disappointment for the Giants, but they did put some work in this offseason, made some key signings on the offensive line, made the blockbuster trade for Brian Burns, drafted Malik Neighbors. They did their best. They tried to improve this roster, and I'd say that they succeeded. But now seeing how they did that and how all of that came to shape should be really interesting. And on the note of Malik Neighbors, while I'm excited to see some OTA and mini camp clips of him making some one-handed catches and cool plays, I'm also interested to see the draft night behind the scenes looks. Are they going to dive into that conversation that they clearly had with the New England Patriots to try and move up for a quarterback? Are we going to get any information on that, or are they just going to gloss over it, pretend that it never happened? I feel like they're going to pretend that it never happened and make zero mention of it because they don't want to diss Daniel Jones. But I'm really hoping on the outside chance that we do get to see some of that conversation and maybe get some insight on how that went down and why they ultimately settled with sticking and picking at number 6 and taking Malik Neighbors.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think it'd be really cool to see that like the behind the scenes of them trying to move up for a quarterback. But from the Giants' perspective, I don't know how they let that out. Like that's got to be one where they watch the first version. They're like, no, you gotta edit that out. We can't have Daniel Jones seeing that we're trying to trade up for a quarterback, or even Malik Neighbors too. Like the guy you stayed pat and drafted him. So I would be surprised if we saw that, although it would be really cool to see it, I think, anyway. I like this comment from First State Jets that I want to pull up and get your thoughts on. Daboll and assistant coaching dynamics, because that was definitely a storyline last year with the defensive coordinator.
Yeah, that'll definitely be an interesting storyline. I'm wondering how early in the offseason they started filming the Hard Knocks, because if they had the cameras rolling when Wink Martindale made his fiery, explosive, curse-filled resignation, that would be pretty cool. Again, doubt that's something that they would show to the public, but we'll obviously see the aftermath of Wink Martindale's resignation, and the hiring of Shane Bowen, I know, is kind of involved in this based on what we heard from some Giants 100 clips that they had at their recent event with all of their legends that they hosted at Madison Square Garden. We heard that there's going to be some insight on the hiring of Shane Bowen and some of his plans for the defense. So I think it will be really interesting to see some of Brian Daboll behind the scenes. There's been a lot of talk about that, maybe some discussions about how he hasn't listened to his assistant coaches in the past. And of course, we know the Wink Martindale thing. So I'm curious to see exactly what it looks like on the day-to-day for Brian Daboll as he leads the team in the office buildings.
First State Jets, a good follow-up here that I want to pull up. But let's run a 30-source anonymous story about Salah seizing phones and then says Daboll fist fighting gets no play with the mainstream media. Yeah, I don't know. Do you think it went that far?
So I don't think it went that far, but I don't know if you remember or if you ever really knew about this as a Jets fan. That did happen with Giants former head coach Joe Judge. He did get into a fist fight with one of his assistant coaches Mark Colombo, the offensive line coach. The rumor was that Mark Colombo punched Joe Judge in the face, knocked him out cold, and then got fired immediately after. That was the rumor.
That's
Oh my
hilarious.
God, do I wish that there was Hard Knocks cameras on the scene for that. That would be like the golden egg of Hard Knocks footage. Mark Colombo knocking out Joe Judge. But yeah, I don't think Daboll's ever gotten that far, but he's definitely cursed out his coaches. That's for sure.
That's incredible. Like, what a moment that would be. There's a lot like combined for the New York Jets and New York Giants over the last even if you want to go back like 10 years. Like, can you imagine seeing Geno Smith get punched out in the locker room and get his jaw broken? Like, if that was on Hard Knocks, these two teams, man, if they're not good on the football field, at least we could say they're entertaining off the field.
Yeah, unfortunately so. That is the case. I mean, I wish the Giants were an entertaining team to watch, some high scoring, explosive offensive plays. That would be great. But at the end of the day, it hasn't been the case for the last several years. But at least we get all these hectic offseason storylines to kind of sink our teeth into.
Absolutely. And speaking of off the field and entertainment, that's a good segue into our first Jets topic of the day. More info on Aaron Rodgers' absence. There was rumors from honestly a few weeks ago at this point that Aaron Rodgers was in Egypt, and Connor Hughes, who covers both the Jets and the Giants for SNY, confirmed that yesterday that Aaron Rodgers was in Egypt. Not really crazy surprising, but something that I think was important that was noted in the report was that his teammates were surprised with the reaction outside of one Jets drive, because it seems like everyone in the building with the coaching staff and the players completely understood it, didn't have an issue with it. And their reactions, like a good example, Sauce Gardner, I think, had a tweet when all this was breaking. And he's like, the guy was here for stage 1 of OTAs and missed a couple, had 2 practices that he wasn't there for in June. Like, we're good. So at least if we're going to positive spin this in any way, I don't think this is affecting the Jets once training camp rolls around, not even getting to when the regular season rolls around. But it doesn't seem like this is going to cause any kind of riff in the locker room, or there going to be any kind of grudges or anything of that nature.
Yeah, it seems to me that all of the players fully support Aaron Rodgers, and it's kind of felt that way. I don't remember exactly who it was. I think it was Sauce Gardner on Twitter last month when we were discussing this, kind of came out and said he was there for every practice during the phase 1 and phase 2 of the offseason. And that is true. That is the case. Listen, if this was a pre-planned trip, then what could the Jets really do about it? Rodgers at least did show up to the OTA practices and has been fully involved and invested with this team in every way. And I think even dating back to last season, he tore his Achilles, still spent every game on the sideline, put the headset on, and tried his best to help Zach Wilson make the most of a really crappy situation. Obviously, it didn't work out, but Rodgers was on the sideline being a great teammate the entire time. And I think that anyone that tries to claim he's a bad teammate just because he went to Egypt for a week or two, I think that that's just overblowing everything and making something out of nothing.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm not going to sit here and say that everything that Aaron Rodgers has done since coming to the New York Jets has been perfect and handled perfectly. I don't think that's fair, but it just feels like the things that skew towards the negative side gets covered to no end. Whether it's every single segment on all the, national shows, but him taking a massive pay cut last year, or as you mentioned, being on the sideline, not being off he could have stayed in California the entire year and no one would have blamed him, for, rehabbing on his own, but he was in the Jets facility, in the meetings, tried to make the comeback and play, the whole thing. But that kind of gets glossed over where we focus on, him spouting off on the Pat McAfee show or going on this trip that was pre-planned that the Jets knew about more so, which I just wish the coverage of it was more balanced. That's all.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that some more balance in it would be really beneficial to the Jets, but also just more fair. I don't think it has been completely fair the way that the media has covered the Jets storylines under the Aaron Rodgers era. Obviously, so much excitement going into last season just for a ton of misery right away in week 1. But since then, it's been pretty unfair coverage in my eyes, and that's coming from a Giants fan. So I don't think that the media has necessarily been too kind to the Jets and to Aaron Rodgers, who have been doing their best to see him fully recover and lead this team this upcoming season. And like I said, I feel like so much of this has been blown out of proportion, and Aaron Rodgers has really been involved and has been a leader for the Jets from the first day that he got traded there. And he doesn't really get enough credit for that, in my opinion. I think that he deserved a lot more respect and a lot more credit for the way that he battled through last offseason, through the injury recovery. The fact that he's even returning to play football this season, I think in and of itself deserves him a bunch of credit and respect, because at that age, when you have that kind of injury, it's pretty easy to hang up the cleats. And Aaron Rodgers made a commitment to this team and said he's coming back for at least another season, if not plenty more. So I think that Aaron Rodgers deserves a lot more respect from the media and fan bases at large.
Yeah, I'm totally with you on that. And I'm just in general excited to see him back on the field in training camp in particular. Like last year, it was very obvious the connection that he was growing with Garrett Wilson. And we saw that to an extent in OTAs. Now, granted, like OTAs is very different than even just training camp. So, but just getting the connections back and seeing who some of his favorite targets are. And it's not a carbon copy of last year because you don't have the, Randall Cobbs and Billy Turners of the world, and Alan Lazard. It's not going to have as big of a role as he was, penciled in to have last year. I think the talent on the roster is better than where they were a year ago, and kind of just seeing this thing through. Like, we've been excited about Aaron Rodgers being the quarterback of the Jets dating back to March of 2023. And we haven't really got a chance to see it yet. We saw it for 4 plays, unfortunately. So Jet fans still have that anticipatory excitement, and just getting to see it finally come to fruition is something that I'm for sure looking forward to.
Absolutely. I can't wait to see Aaron Rodgers play for the Jets this season. Again, as a Giants fan, I don't usually get excited for the New York Jets necessarily, but I think it'll be cool to see them actually have a decent quarterback for once, and to see Aaron Rodgers kind of make his career renaissance and resurgence here at his ripe age. And let's see how it goes. I think it's going to be really exciting. It's good for football. At the end of the day, I'm not a Jets fan, but Aaron Rodgers returning to form with the New York Jets in the Big Apple and winning a playoff game, that is good for the NFL and good for the fans of football. So I'm also excited. I'm right there with you. I can't wait to see Aaron Rodgers take the field. He's got a nice arsenal of weapons. The offensive line in front of him should be improved, so hopefully he doesn't get sacked on the 4th play of the game and get injured again. Hopefully he just has a nice, healthy, resurgent 2024 season. I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Now, 2-part question. One, do we think we see Aaron Rodgers against the New York Giants in the preseason like we did last year? And then part 2, is there going to be some sort of like beef like we saw between Jihad Ward and Aaron Rodgers 2.0?
Well, Jihad Ward's gone, so that beef is over with. But if there's anybody else who's going to start a beef with Aaron Rodgers, I don't know who it would be, because the Giants, unfortunately, I haven't seen much of that mean streak on this team in recent years. Jihad Ward brought it last year in that preseason game, but overall, it's kind of hard to pinpoint like nasty guys on the Giants defense. And unfortunately, I think that's one of the reasons that this team hasn't been as great as it was towards the Super Bowl winning era that we had. I mean, that team was full of just angry, mean defensive linemen who get in the face of the quarterback. So probably no beef if I had to kind of take a guess, but actually I take that back. How about Jalen Hyatt versus Sauce Gardner? Maybe they start beefing during the game in the preseason after that infamous incomplete pass.
The most famous incomplete pass of all time last preseason. So I wonder, I can only imagine the storylines we're going to get out of that game, and not too far away, a little over a month, I guess closer to 2, but still we'll be able to preview that game here on the stream and react to it. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've talked about, like, we started this show in February and we haven't really got to do it during football season. So especially when these two teams play even though it's a preseason game, it's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's going to be a great time. And to answer the other part of your question, do I think Aaron Rodgers will play? Probably not. I feel like they're going to bubble wrap him, I would assume. Maybe give him some snaps in the final preseason game. When do the Giants and Jets play? Is it preseason game 1, 2, 3?
That's a great question. I want to say 2, but let's see. Let's look this up. The 24th, I believe. Let's see.
Okay, so it's week 3 of the preseason.
Oh, it is.
There we go.
Okay.
Yep. So Giants have the Lions and the Texans, then the Jets on Saturday, the 24th, 7:30. That'll be a lot of fun, definitely, to kind of preview and discuss and react to on this channel. But yeah, maybe we'll see some Jalen Hyatt versus Sauce Gardner. I think that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I was thrown off because last year the Jets had the Hall of Fame game too, so they had the
Hmm.
extra preseason game. So I couldn't remember the order from last year and if it translated to this one. But anyway, moral of the story: maybe we get to see some of the starters for a drive. I'm still not used to. I know it's been like this for a couple of years now, but I'm still not used to the only 3 preseason games. That's still an adjustment for me.
I'm still not used to the 17 regular season games. I was writing an article this morning and I wrote the Giants went 9-7 in 2022. And I was like, wait, they actually went 9-7-1. They had an extra game in there and they tied it. So I always forget that. It's really kind of confusing for me, even though it's been a few years.
It is. I miss it. My old man yelling at Cloud Take is that the old format was the best with the the 6 seeds in each conference. First 2 get the bye in 16 games. That's football to me. I don't know what this is.
I'm with you, but prepare yourself because the 18 game season
Oh,
feels like an inevitability. It's got to be happening sooner rather than later, unfortunately so. But I'm with you. I prefer the 16 games, the 10-6, the 9-7 in records. The fact that you could go 16-0, 17-0 is really impossible. But just in general, I totally do agree with you. I prefer the old format.
All right, next up on the docket, Kavon Tibido listed as one of the breakout candidates in the NFL for this year. Let's get into that.
I want to say that I find the narrative around Kavon Tibido to be very interesting. How he exploded statistically, going from 4 sacks as a rookie to 11.5 sacks in year 2. Yet he's now being considered a breakout candidate, like as if he didn't already have his breakout. And I have to say, it feels like that is purely just because of one singular Twitter thread that Brett Coleman made. It's like it changed the narrative completely. And like, I'm not saying that it's unjustified because Brett Coleman, the information and statistics that he brought up in that Twitter thread were super valuable. If you have the opportunity to pull them up, Matt, that would be great so that
Yep.
we can get some more context. But essentially, it was just about how most of Kavon Thibodeau's sack production came against backups or cleanup sacks, and he wasn't creating consistent down-to-down pressure. But prior to that tweet, it was, man, Kavon Tibido, 11.5 sacks, finally had his breakout. Can't wait to see him in year 3. And now we've reverted back to Thibodeau was good, but not great. Let's see if he breaks out in 2024. So it's just so interesting how one kind of piece of information can change the narrative for a player. And that feels to be what's happened with Thibodeau. So it is surprising for me that we're at this point where we're discussing a breakout in year 3 for Kavon Thibodeau, despite the fact that he did put up double-digit sacks this past season and overall did look like a much better player than he did in his rookie year.
Yeah, I thought he looked improved from year 1 into year 2. I don't know if this is the tweet that you are referencing, but I just typed in his username and Kavon Tibido. We're saying only 2 of them were from actually beating a starting tackle one-on-one. The other 9.5 were beating backups or cleanup effort sacks. Yeah, I guess so, right? This is it.
Yeah, so there was that tweet, and then there was another one where I think Coleman said that he ranked like 91st or something. Yeah, the
This, I
second one
guess.
right there. Yep, 90th in pass rush win rate for one-on-one straight rushes. So overall, just kind of exposing the fact that maybe his sack production looked great on paper, but his down-to-down production was very inconsistent. And that I do agree with. I thought that Kavon Tibido was very inconsistent last year, but I thought that the highs were high, and I thought that the great plays that he made were great enough to feel as though he had a breakout or at least took a big step forward in year 2. And yeah, of course, we project an even bigger step forward in year 3, and we're hoping that the addition of Brian Burns really helps him out. But I just find this narrative so interesting. I feel like if this was 5 years ago before analytics really started to take over here in the NFL, not even to say that they've taken over that much, but they've definitely become a more prominent point of the conversation. But 5 years ago, I feel like a pass rusher who was picked 5th overall, going from 4 sacks to 11.5 in year 2, we're talking about him being a potential Pro Bowler and an absolute breakout star already. So I just find the narrative so interesting surrounding Kavon Thibodeau.
Yeah, it definitely is. I feel like you get like a mixed bag, and especially early on too. Like I know there was the whole Carl Banks and WFAN beef that they had about talking about Kavon Tibido. But he's such a polarizing guy. I like Kavon. That's to be truly honest with you, I wanted the Jets to take Kavon Tibido 4th overall. They ended up taking Sauce Gardner and getting an edge later in the first round anyway. So, it all came out in the wash. It was good. But I was a big fan of his game coming out. I thought he was relatively quiet in year 1 for what his expectations were. But in year 2, I thought he was better. I'm not saying that he's a finished product, but to kind of be so dismissive of his year 2 season, I think is a little bit strange. But it feels like that to me feels like the more prominent narrative was that he wasn't actually that great in year 2, which I think is a little unfair.
I agree with you. I think that it is unfair. And while I get it, because he was kind of inconsistent week to week and a little bit of a disappearing act, like I get the criticisms, and it's not that I don't agree with them. It's just that I feel as though a little bit more credit needs to be given to Thibodeau for the sack total that he accomplished in year 2. So it's an enigma. I don't think we've ever seen something like this. With a player where they so clearly on paper, on the box score, have a breakout, but it's almost feels like the really analytical nerds of football Twitter have like silenced the narrative of Kavon Tibido having a breakout and are trying to convince the world that he really sucks and isn't this great player. But I feel like if you ask any casual Giants fan in the New York, New Jersey area, like, what'd you think of Kavon Tibido last year? They're going to say 11 and a half sacks. He was incredible. He had 3 sacks against the Jets. Like, they'll bring up how great he was and won't bring up the analytics. But those who really take a look at the closer stats have like really driven this narrative that he's not a great player yet. But I don't think that's necessarily fair, especially when you consider the fact, and I think this is the biggest talking point that Giants fans don't discuss, he was playing in the Wink Martindale system. How was he supposed to have that play-to-play breakout when half of the time that he was having these one-on-one pass rushes that, and again, no disrespect to Brett Coleman for great work there, but he mentioned that on these one-to-one pass rushes, he wasn't actually generating pressure. He wasn't actually asked to generate pressure, though. He was asked to move an offensive lineman off of his spot to open up a lane for an incoming blitzer oftentimes, or anything else. So I just think that it's impossible to get those double-digit sacks in a Martindale system. Kavon accomplished it. Now going into year 3 and his first year with Shane Bowen, where he's actually going to be pass rushing one-on-one every single play and having a great pass rusher opposite him and Brian Burns, I think that this breakout that we could see from Kavon Tibido, we already did see it, but yeah, it is true that he could break out even further this upcoming year in a simplified defense, playing alongside some other great pass rushers.
That's all very great points. I think one, you bring up the change in defensive coordinator to a scheme that's going to be more friendly to his game is a plus. The guy opposite of him is going to be significantly better. There's one more thing that we haven't mentioned yet that I think is key in all this. He's still only 23. He doesn't turn 24 years old until December. So to me, like, I don't think he's a finished product. I think it's fair to say, like, hey, I have maybe some concerns or some questions about his ceiling or even just his season in general in year 2, but I don't know. I wouldn't be capping Kavon Tibido's ceiling after 2 years with, as you mentioned, a scheme that is not very friendly to pass rushers. I can tell you this, he's not going to be dropping into coverage nearly as much as what he was in Wink Martindale's system. So to me, I think it's a no-brainer that Tibido is better this year, but I don't think he's going to go from, or, well, he isn't actually going from like nothing to a double-digit sack guy. He had it last year with 11 and a half, even if it's not him getting the sacks the way that you wanted him to, if that makes any sense.
Right. It does make sense. I do completely agree with you. And again, maybe the sacks didn't come as often or as frequent since, again, 3 of the 11 and a half came in one game. So you only had 8.5 across the other 16 games of the season. So yeah, it wasn't exactly the best, most consistent season from him. But like you said, he's so young. The potential still has not been completely realized, as First State Jets is pointing out as well. He has great potential. It's kind of mysterious how he ebbs and flows. I agree. I do think that is a little bit mysterious, but when you break it down and take a closer look at this Wink Martindale defense that he was playing in, I feel like that was what was holding him back and causing him to ebb and flow. And I feel as though if Kavon Tibido is given the opportunity this season to just pass rush, and not drop into coverage, disrupt his flow and timing, or ask to do a ton of twists and stunts, he can have less ebbs and flows. And I think that's a really great point to bring up, because for pass rushing, it's so much of it is a chess match, right? You have to go play by play and kind of set up some pass rush moves early to counter and combo later on in the game against the guy that you're pass rushing against. And how are you able to set up those later moves in your pass rushing repertoire when half of the time that you're pass rushing, you're not even pass rushing? So the chess game that's played between defensive linemen and offensive linemen, Thibodeau wasn't really allowed to play that, and he wasn't allowed to set up moves for later and create plays for himself and put himself in position to get sacks later on in the game. So I think that now that should change, and it should be really interesting to see if he's able to find more consistency and create more production this season.
Yeah, and that's kind of what First State Jets is saying here. He has great potential. It's kind of mysterious how he ebbs and flows. I think he's more consistent this year as well. And then Peter chimes in, says, "Happy birthday, Anthony." And yeah, some players have to be in the right system to maximize their potential. And again, that seems like what's going to be the case for him and the Giants this year.
Yeah, I agree. Peter, thank you for the birthday wish. And I also do think that systems are a huge part of football and coaching. I think oftentimes we see such great players drafted into the league and they're not put into the right system, and they don't have the right opportunities to realize their potential. And so putting them in the right system and maximizing that potential is huge. And the Giants, unfortunately, have not done a great job of that in recent years with a lot of their draft picks. They haven't maximized the potential of those players and developed them properly. But I do think that this coaching change from Martindale to Bowen could be the catalyst towards Kavon Tibido reaching that potential.
Absolutely. So let's close with one more Jets topic in here. We'll minimize Peter's comment. The Draft Network put out an article yesterday about Jets' third-year tight end Jeremy Rucker that I found interesting because they listed him as a make-or-break player, that it was kind of now or never for Jeremy Rucker. And I was a little bit confused by that. This same outlet also kind of said the same thing, almost word for word about Jermaine Johnson last year. And I think it's even crazier to say it's a make or break season in year 2 for a player. And then Jermaine went out and had a Pro Bowl season. Now for Jeremy Rucker with Tyler Conklin on this roster, I don't think he is going to have the same sort of reps that Jermaine Johnson did last year, being that Johnson was a starter. And unless there's an injury, Jeremy Rucker won't be. But without CJ Uzama this year taking up a roster spot, I do think we see more of a role for Rucker this year as a tight end too. And I think there still is upside that we've seen with him so far in his first 2 years. So I'm not out on Jeremy Rucker, and I think it was a little, maybe a touch on the harsh side to classify this as a make or break season for him.
I think that it's always a little bit harsh to classify any second season as a make or break. I think the only position in football where that maybe could be accurate is if you're talking about a quarterback. Like if you're talking about Bryce Young going into a make or break season, okay, sure, I think you can justify that. But for a tight end or a pass rusher, so to speak, because we were kind of just talking about Kavon going into year 3, I mean, these guys are young, and those positions, they really do take a while to develop into. I mean, think about what goes into being a tight end. You're a blocker, you're a pass catcher. You do so much on every single play in an offense, and to have all that responsibility expanded upon once you go from college to the NFL, it takes time, and tight ends often do take a good while to develop. I mean, even if you want to look at the Giants, recently retired Darren Waller, how about all the development that he had to take before he finally had his breakout? He's with the Ravens as a receiver, then he bounced around to the Raiders, eventually became a Pro Bowl level tight end. Give these guys time, these young players. I think that in the NFL in particular, and especially in New York sports and New York football fans, the patience has been lacking for some of these young players, and they're expected to make that impact year 1, year 2. And if not, then they're done. They're busts. But I don't know. For Jeremy Rucker going into his second season, let's see. Give him a chance. Give him some time to develop and maybe realize that potential. I think that he could be a pretty solid player for the Jets this season.
Yeah, I think so too. And tight ends, as you mentioned, is a position that sometimes takes a little bit. There's 2 semi-recent examples of this with Dawson Knox in Buffalo. Really didn't become the guy we know him as until year 3. And someone that you know pretty well from his time in Dallas, Dalton Schultz, really didn't become a mainstay in that offense until his 3rd year in the league. So for me, I think tight ends deserve a little bit of a leash, especially someone who is taken in the third round. Him sitting behind two veterans in Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzama, I think is, only going to benefit his game. And he's been a factor as a blocker. I think we'll see him more as a blocker this year, even because I'd be surprised if they end up carrying a fullback with just how this roster is. So I think those snaps that were going to Nick Bawden will also be going to Jeremy Rucker in kind of that H-back role. So I think he gets on the field more that way. But also we've talked about it when mentioning Tyler Conklin or just pretty much any receiver on the Jets over the last 2 years. How can we judge him fully with the quarterback play that they've had the last 2 seasons, whether it was Zach Wilson, Trevor Siemian, Tim Boyle, Joe Flacco, Mike White, whoever? It's not like they were in the best quarterback situation either.
No, 100% true. I think kind of how we were talking about systems can pull a player back and hold them back or help maximize their potential. Players that they're playing alongside also have that effect. I mean, whether we're talking about Kavon Tibido now having a breakout because he's playing alongside Brian Burns, or if we're talking about Jeremy Rucker having a breakout because he has Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football rather than Zach Wilson, it makes a difference how accurate the pass is, how timely the pass is, and whether or not he's getting the ball on plays that are designed for him. Sometimes quarterbacks don't read the field properly and don't throw to the open receiver and the right receiver. Maybe Rucker has had opportunities left on the table from him because of the poor quarterback play. And I think you can make that argument for even Garrett Wilson, who went for 1,000 receiving yards last season. I'm sure that he had a whole lot more yards left on the field where the ball was inaccurate or just didn't go his way when it should have. So I think that is a really good point that Aaron Rodgers not only is going to give the Jets potential to bounce back and potentially have a huge upcoming season where they make the postseason, but he's also going to create breakout opportunities and break points for other players in the offensive lineup.
Yeah, Peter chimes in and says Rucker will thrive being tight end too, even if some of it's blocking for Brees and company, and then follows it up with, it's been nice seeing Rucker develop the last 2 years. And, part of it too, I think, has to be the rest of the 2022 draft class. Like the Jets' first 4 picks from that class, Sauce Gardner, Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall, Jermaine Johnson, have all come into the league and kind of popped right away, while a guy like Rucker really hasn't yet. And again, not all of that's on him. I think some of it is circumstantial. We've seen him play well in the preseason. He has a couple preseason touchdowns. So I think it's only a matter of time before he's, again, I'm not saying a star or anything like that, but a useful piece in this offense as a role player, blocker, and every once in a while getting in on the passing attack.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, I think you kind of made a good point earlier mentioning Dawson Knox and Dalton Schultz, like some of these guys who you can point to and say the hit rate on mid-round tight ends is pretty solid. A lot of the tight ends in the NFL who start and who develop into good players, they are found in the middle rounds, but they do take a little while to develop. So you got to give Rucker a little bit more time and see if he finds an opportunity to become a focal point in the offense. And then what does he do with that opportunity? I think that you could feel pretty good about his potential as a mid-round pick at the tight end position, whereas sure, for quarterback, the majority of the starters are first-round picks, and it's kind of tough to see those mid-round guys develop, but every position is different, and for tight ends in particular, mid-round picks usually pan out and become good players, but they just take a little bit of time. And so for Rucker, I think it's just about finding the opportunities. The Jets' offensive coaching staff giving him more opportunities and more to work with. I think it'll hopefully lead to him developing into a pretty high-quality player.
Yeah, and unfortunately, not crazy high on this Jets offensive coaching staff with Nathaniel Hackett and Todd Downing and Keith Carter and names like that. But I will say the Jets tight end coach is very well respected. He actually was a coach for the Senior Bowl a couple of years ago. And when Robert Saleh was out with COVID in, I guess that was 2021, Ron Middleton led the Jets to win, which was exciting.
100%. I think that definitely gives you a little bit more confidence in Rucker, knowing that you have a good tight ends coach. And again, it ties into Aaron Rodgers, knowing that you have a good quarterback throwing the ball and calling the plays. I think that's also a big part of it. It's not just about getting the ball timely and accurately to the receivers, but it's the fact that Aaron Rodgers he gets the freedom to call those plays at the line of scrimmage and to change things around, where Zach Wilson probably wasn't given that freedom from the coaching staff. And if he was, they probably didn't feel too confident in his abilities to run the offense and call hot routes and audible at the line of scrimmage. But it's Aaron Rodgers. Like, he knows football. He knows how to put his players in position to succeed. He'll call the plays at the line of scrimmage. He'll make the changes, and those players will be better off for it. And that will include guys like Mike Williams. If Rodgers is telling him with a hand signal, go run a back shoulder fade and make a reception 30 yards downfield, or if he's telling a guy like Jeremy Rucker to run out into the flat because he sees an opening because of a cornerback blitz, flip him the ball and let him pick up 10, 15 yards a pop. So Aaron Rodgers is going to make that difference. So meanwhile, we probably feel like Nathaniel Hackett might hold this team back a little bit. Aaron Rodgers can make up the difference, call those plays at the line, and put his teammates in position to succeed. And again, that might lead to the breakout of more than one player in this offensive lineup.
Absolutely. That's what we're hoping for. So I think that's going to do it for us on this episode of Big Apple Blitz. Any final thoughts or predictions before we wrap this episode today?
I'm hoping that we get some insight tonight on Xavier McKinney and why he's no longer a New York Giant. I really want to see something from that in the Hard Knocks special, because obviously everybody who's been following along with this show since the start of the offseason knows I was pretty salty about that. I was pretty upset that the Giants didn't bring back Xavier McKinney. Still am. Still an open wound. I got a friend of mine who's a big Packers fan. He's tuning into the Jets this season, actually, because he's really excited to see Aaron Rodgers return. He's a big Packers fan, and he won't stop rubbing into my face the fact that Xavier McKinney is on his team and not my team. So I need to get a little bit more information and clairvoyance on why Xavier McKinney is going to be a cheesehead rather than a New York Giant this upcoming season, and also hoping for some Tommy DeVito slow-mo clips.
Yes, as we all can hope for. I will be tuned in as well for Hard Knocks, guys. That's going to do it for us in this episode. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you aren't already. Check out Anthony's work over on Fireside Giants. You can find me at Matt O'Leary NY or on Talking Jets. That'll do it. I'm Matt. He's Anthony, and we will catch you next time.